The webinar where we'll be talking about our investment operations and in particular investment in the 21st century. By way of backdrop, obviously AJ Bell investments are quite new into the asset management industry. Myself, I've only been here for about 7 months now. Unfortunately, I can't say I'm new to the asset management industry. Been in this industry now for about 20 years or so as an analyst, fund manager, Chief Investment Officer at a private bank before moving on to European Investment Bank as Head of Strategy and Research. Took a little sabbatical, spent some time living on a boat in Italy before coming back to the UK to work closely with advisors in the advice community, really on a consultancy basis, setting up central investment propositions. Took a number of advisors from advisory permissions through to discretionary permissions, and put investment governance processes in place before joining AJ Bell on the 1st of November of last year, where our mantra is to build an asset management business for the 21st century. We'll come on to how we intend to do that in a sec, but just a couple of housekeeping items before we kick off. Hopefully on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see a control panel. There's an opportunity, there's a little box in there where you can drop any questions during the course of the presentation, and towards the end we'll take a Q&A session there. We'll answer any questions that come on through. If there's a plethora of questions, we'll probably respond to them after the webinar in some sort of email or what have you. But you know, my experience tells me we don't end up with a huge amount of questions. But please, if you've got any, pop them in the box there. Similarly, during the course of the presentation, if you've got any technical problems, again, if you drop them into that questions box, we're the only people who can see what comes up on the question box. So there's no such thing as a stupid question, but if you've got a problem, drop it in the box there and we'll do our best to address that. After the Q&A session, we'll send an email out about an hour or so after the webinar finishes, asking for your feedback. And of course, in return for that, you get an hour's CPD certificate, and a copy of the slides will also be sent out via email. On the subject of CPD, obviously this is, we live in a regulatory world, so just for the benefit of doubt, this content is suitable only for a professional advisor audience. Okay then, so we've got the housekeeping stuff out of the way. Let's crack on with the presentation itself. And you know, we've had a great summer of sports. Obviously, we've had the slight disappointment of England going out to the World Cup, but a bit premature. But it's been a great summer of sport, and it follows on from a great winter of sport as well. We had the Winter Olympics over in Korea out in February. And of course, in the Winter Olympics, the blue ribbon event, as everyone knows, is the men's downhill. This is the one that everyone wants to win. I remember as a kid sitting watching ski Sunday with my dad, watching the likes of Franz Klammer coming down in his banana outfit, 100 mile an hour. That's pretty impressive. And as an individual, this is the one that everyone wants to win in the Winter Olympics. But for nations, this isn't necessarily the case. For nations, the one that they want to win isn't the downhill men's. It's actually the four-man bob. That's the gold events that nations want to win, because it brings together, you know, it brings together team spirit, it brings together individual athleticism, and it also brings an engineering aspect to it. So ever since 1924, when the four-man bobsleigh was first run in the Winter Olympics, this is the event that nations have wanted to win. And for the first 5 Winter Olympics, from 1924 through to 1948, there were 2 nations who dominated the four-man bobsleigh, and that was the Swiss and the United States. Just a little interesting factoid, in 1928, for some reason unbeknownst to anyone, they decided to change the four-man bobsleigh into a 5-man bobsleigh. They quickly reversed it back in 1932 as a result of someone dying in the 5-man bobsleigh. Simply 5-man bobs aren't really stable. But by 1948, there have been 5 winners of the 4-man bobsleigh. The US had won it 3 times and the Swiss had won it twice. But by 1952, that all changed. 1956, 1964, 68, the Germans and the Swiss dominated the event. And that went through all the way until 2006, when again the Swiss won the 4-man bobsleigh. And the US were feeling a little bit upset by this. Having been dominant in the early days of the four-man bob, they wanted to know why it was that they could no longer win this event. And so in 2007, they decided to take a change of track. And they went off and they met this guy, Jeffrey Sather, who I want to introduce you to there. You can see he's got a veritable Scrabble rack of letters after his name there. He's a master of business. He's a qualified doctor. And in particular, Jeff's passions are biomechanics and data. His real passion, as you can see in the background there, is actually horses, and that's what he lives for. But his passions when it comes to a scientific background are biomechanics and data. Now you might wonder what's this got to do with the four-man bobsleigh. In fact, you might be wondering what's any of this got to do with investments right now, and I'll come to that in a second. But what Jeff Sather did is he brought a different way of thinking to the four-man bobsleigh. He challenged the common perceived wisdoms of the day, which in the bobsleigh, which is a gravity-assisted event, the idea was that you win the bobsleigh in the first 2 to 3 seconds of the race. You get 4 burly men to push with as much power as they possibly can that bobsleigh to build up enough momentum. You jump into the bobsleigh and you let gravity basically do the rest. And that was the common perceived wisdom across all bobsleigh teams, until that was Jeff Sather came into play. So 2007, Jeff Sather threw aside all the common perceived wisdoms and looked at this from a data and a biomechanics point of view. So he brought and he pioneered actually some of the slow motion photography that you see on sports programs today. Jeff Sather pioneered that in a sports science context and brought ultra slow motion photography to it, and then analysed the data. And the data that Jeff Sather came across, that he looked at things like the weights of the crew, power ratios, etc. What he actually found is it had nothing to do with the power that you generate in the first 2 seconds of the bobsleigh. Not raw power. Raw power itself was actually hindering the efforts of the teams. Because in some cases, the teams were so heavy and they were pushing so hard, they were actually creating vibrations in the tracks of the bobsleigh, which created friction and actually slowed down the bobsleigh. Imperceivable at the top of the run, but as a couple of hundred of seconds by the time you get to the bottom of the run. So he challenged those perceived wisdoms, and in 2007 he basically sacked the US four-man bobsleigh team. He went away from the linebackers and the bodybuilders of this world, and instead went off to the world of ballet. And he recruited 3 ballet dancers and left the original pilot in the crew, and changed how they went about the bobsleigh by creating a more efficient outcome rather than just raw power and relying on the common perceived wisdoms. What they're able to do is generate more efficiency at the top of the run and carry that momentum all the way down to the bottom of the run. And so by 2010 in Vancouver, what you can see there is the US bobsleigh team celebrating the gold medal at Vancouver. So bringing that biomechanics, bringing that understanding of data, and challenging the common perceived wisdoms, Jeff Sather was able to show in the bobsleigh how you can change the outcome. Not content with that, and in fact probably spurred on by that, he decided to bring the same approach to the world of equine sports. Now, in the equine industry, the common perceived wisdom when it comes to racehorses is, if you want to find yourself a great 3-year-old racehorse, and remember you're buying a racehorse probably in the first 12 months of its life. If you want to buy a great 3-year-old racehorse, the thing to do is you study its parentage, you study its lineage. And the common perceived wisdom is that the quality of the mother and father of the horse, and you can see I'm not up to date on my equine terms here, but the quality of the mother and the father of the horse would be a strong predictor of how good a horse would be as a 1-year-old, how good it would be as a 2 and a 3-year-old when they begin to race. And that's the common perceived wisdom in the equine industry, and remains the common perceived wisdom in the equine industry. But Jeff Sather was able to show through his study of data that there is actually no linkage whatsoever between the quality of the 3-year-old horse and its lineage. In fact, the only correlation Jeff Sather could find between lineage and a horse was the price you pay for that horse in auction as a 1-year-old. So armed with this data, Jeff Sader tried to convince the members of the equine industry that their common perceived wisdoms are actually wrong and there was a better way of doing it. Unfortunately, his words fell on deaf ears, apart from, thankfully, one Egyptian chap who, wealthy as he is, wasn't able to compete with the Sheikh Mohammeds of this world and the JP McManuses of this world, and decided to give Jeff's ideas a go. So let's go and take you now to 2010, 2011, and we're in the midst of the of some of the Egyptian revolutions that were taking place, the Arab Spring, as it were. And the Egyptian horse owner brings some of his own horses to auction in order to sell them, in order to buy what he perceived will be more productive horses. He brings Jeff Sader along with him, and Jeff undertakes some slow motion photography. He brings his wealth of data from years and years of study of equine industry. And what Jeff actually was able to find is there's actually only 2 things that positively contribute to the quality of a racehorse as a 3-year-old, which you can detect as a 1-year-old. And those 2 things are the size of the horse's left ventricle in the heart, not something you can observe with standard techniques. And Jeff Sader developed instruments that allowed him to do that. And also the ability of the horse to change gait whilst coming out the left-hand bend. Most of the US horse tracks are left-handers, so the ability to change gait actually as you come down the bend was also really important. They get to this auction, and in the auction, they take the measurements, they take a look at all the horses, and Jeff Sader pulls his Egyptian boss aside and he says, "I think I've found the horse of a lifetime. This horse has the bigger left ventricle in its heart I've ever seen, and they can change gait coming around the corner." The Egyptian owner said, "That's slightly embarrassing, that's my horse." So what Jeff Sader says to the Egyptian is, if you do anything, sell your house. Do not sell this horse. But it's already in the auction, so they have to actually buy back their own horse. Now the good thing is, this horse, as you can see on the slide there, actually had a little bit of a wrinkle on its ankle, which people were concerned would make it lame in later life. And they were able to buy back their own horse for just $100,000, which sounds like a lot of money to you and I, but for a horse, but the average price of a horse in this auction was over $2 million. So $100,000 for this horse was an absolute steal. 3 years on, we got this horse, which I'll give you the name of now, it's American Pharaoh. 3 years on, this horse starts to race as a 2-year-old and shows a lot of promise. As a 3-year-old though, it performs miracles. Now in the UK, for any of the horse fans that are out there, there are 5 classic races: the 1,000, 2,000 Guineas, the Oaks, the Derby, and the St. Leger. Now there's not as many classics in the US calendar, there's just 3, and they're known as the Triple Crown. And then it's the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness Stakes, and the Belmont Stakes, and they're run in that order. 2014, American Pharaoh wins the Kentucky Derby. 2014, it goes on to win the Preakness Stakes. And in 2014, as you can see on the slide there, you'll see American Pharaoh passing the post first at the Belmont Stakes, winning the American Triple Crown for only the 13th time in its history. And the American Triple Crown hadn't been won for about 30 years prior to American Pharaoh in 2014. Now, for any real horse racing fans out there, you'll know that in 2018, another horse, Justifies, actually also won the US Triple Crown. It's not one of Jeff Sader's horses, but if you go into Wikipedia and read the biography of Justify, the first thing you see on the biography of Justify is its lineage. They talk about who the father and mother of the horse are. They talk about its grandparents. They talk about all of the lineage, demonstrating that actually in this, in the equine industry, things haven't moved on, despite the fact that Jeff Sader has been able to prove that it's not lineage that determines the success of a horse. This is an industry that remains weathered to how things have been done in the past. And I've told you that story because I think it's a great analogy of what happens in our industry. In the asset management industry, we remain weathered to some of the practices of the past. And what we're trying to do at AJ Bell is bring some of those lessons about applying human intelligence and human understanding of data, but mixing that with data science techniques in order to provide better outcomes. So one example of that is to challenge some of the common perceived wisdoms within our industry. In our industry, we all know that we build portfolios using something called modern portfolio theory. Well, at AJ Bell, we think that's slightly a bit of a misnomer. It's hard to apply the label modern to modern portfolio theory, given that it was a paper written in 1952 by Markowitz. Modern portfolio theory doesn't sit well with me for a paper that was written before the advent of computer technology. And some of the underlying assumptions behind modern portfolio theory were designed to cope with the fact that you didn't have the computing power that we see today. In 1952, it was quite rightly perceived that you would build diversity into portfolios by holding stocks from around the globe. Because in 1952, business cycles and economies were nowhere near as synchronized as they are today. Business cycles did move in different places. News didn't travel as fast. Global trade wasn't as integrated as it is today. So in 1952, for example, the correlation between UK and European stocks would have been quite low. And therefore, by putting UK and European stocks into your portfolio, you would have built diversity into it and resulted in an efficient, diversified portfolio. But as you can see on this slide here, over the past 20 years, the correlation between UK and European large cap stocks is practically almost 100%. And in fact, actually, you go through the European debt crisis of 2010, 2011, etc. The correlation there was well into the 90% range and remains over 75% to this day. Contrast that with the correlation between UK large cap and global technology, and you can see, okay, during the financial crisis, the correlations did increase, but consistently, you end up with less correlation. And therefore, if you rethink about how you build your asset allocations and rethink about what efficiency actually means, you can build more efficient portfolios by challenging the common perceived wisdom that you should build your portfolio entirely on a geographical basis. What we've done is we've built, using data science techniques, we've tested different asset classes and different allocations to find out where the most efficient portfolios can be built. And introducing not geographical but sectoral allocations into portfolios, such as global technology, such as your emerging market debt, such as UK small cap, which actually has a lower correlation between UK small cap and UK large cap than you do between UK large cap and European large cap. By building these sorts of sectoral allocations into portfolios, you can create a more efficient portfolio. So let's just demonstrate how we do that, and again challenge some of the common perceived wisdoms. We'll all be familiar with this idea of the risk-return plot, and we'll all be familiar, because we've all done our exams, we'll all be familiar with the efficient frontier. Well, I need to challenge that, because I've used the term the efficient frontier there, and of course there's not a single efficient frontier. There's no such thing as the efficient frontier. There's only an efficient frontier, depending on the underlying assumptions. So standard techniques, as you build your efficient frontier, you set your appropriate level of risk or return, and as a result, you end up with a efficient frontier depending on which one of those two is you're targeting. By introducing different asset classes and a different way of doing things, combined with data science, that human intelligence combined with the data science allows you to build a more efficient frontier. And so for a given level of risk, you can actually squeeze out a higher expected rate of return. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this is a revelation in asset management, but it is a slight improvement. And what we've shown through our back testing is this slight improvement can lead to a 20 to 30 basis point improvement on an annualized basis in returns. Now, 20 to 30 basis points might not sound a lot, but of course, in an environment where, again, in the 21st century, we need to challenge the common perceived wisdoms, the idea that a balanced portfolio, and I've been in the industry long enough to know that when we did projections for balanced portfolios 20 years ago, your expected rate of return was more like 8 or 9%. Then it became more like 6 or 7%, and these days it's probably more about 5%. So these 25, 30 basis points do actually make a difference. And if you can increase your return by those 25, 30 basis points on an annualized basis over a long investment horizon, they compound up in order to make a significant change in returns over a long period of time. So from one end of the telescope, by building more efficient portfolios, we can create better outcomes for clients. But just from one end of the telescope isn't enough, in our opinion. And so that's why at the other end of the telescope, we've made commitments to the marketplace, particularly on costs. And what we said is we'll build our portfolios in order to challenge, again, the common perceived wisdoms within the industry. Now, the common perceived wisdom in the industry is an MPS portfolio should cost you 30 basis points. Practically everyone in this marketplace charges 30 basis points plus VAT for their MPS portfolios. So what we've done as a new entrant is, because we have a 21st century mentality, because we understand that returns going forward will not reach the returns that you've seen in the past, because we don't have any legacy systems and because we don't have any legacy client base to protect, we're able to charge our portfolios using our innovative techniques when it comes to research and using our distribution capacity as a provider of platforms. We're able to take the cost savings from our change to our research processes on our efficiency and distribution. We're able to take those cost savings and give them back to clients in the form of lower costs. So our MPS portfolios cost just 15 basis points, but we don't believe it's all just about cost. By reducing the cost and also increasing the expected returns, if you can do that at both ends of the telescope, you can create not a 20 to 25 basis point improvements, but combined you can create 40 to 50 basis point improvements. And if you do that again over a long period of time, that leads to significant improvements in customer outcomes. But it's not all just about cost. Our commitments are sure they're about cost, but we also believe that as advisors, you should be allowed choice. So we don't think it's our job to tell you whether you should be an active or a passive investor. We don't think it's our job to tell you what attitude to risk provider you should use, if indeed you use one at all. We don't think it's our job to tell you whether you should be invested in MPS or funds. And so what we've built is a range which is an accumulation range from cautious all the way through to global growth. An income range which gives you either a low risk option of 4% yield and capital preservation, or a 4% yield and inflation protection. And we give you the option to map that against any one of the major ATR providers out there. And also we give you the option to adopt that either in MPS format or fund format. Now on cost, it's not just about being low cost, it's about being transparent on cost. And anyone who's read the FCA investment platform study, which came out yesterday, will know that this is absolutely the direction of travel that the regulator wants to go in. And so we prepared this slide, which is available on our website, which breaks down the underlying costs, shows you what you pay to AJ Bell for managing portfolios, what you pay for the underlying investments in the portfolios themselves, what the cost of the vehicle is, which of course you don't pay a vehicle cost for MPS, but you do for funds, and what you pay for gaining access to that fund or that portfolio via our platform. And we think this is probably the level of transparency that the industry needs to go through. So we've tried to preempt that and provide you with that information up front. So by bringing together all of these things, and I'll wrap up now and open for questions, by bringing together all of these things, by bringing our human understanding of asset management and bringing our experience to bear there. In the same way that Jeff Saber did, he understood bobsleigh, he understood biomechanics, he understood the equine industry. Rather than going to a pure data science approach, where what you find with a lot of data science businesses, they mine data and come up with spurious correlations. We believe it's a combination of having data science and human understanding which delivers the best outcomes. By bringing those disciplines to bear, we can increase the likelihood of a sound outcome for clients, but also we can lower the cost for clients as well. And it's that joint approach which we believe generates good outcomes. So by bringing that research and distribution to bear, by focusing on cost, focus on returns, we believe that as an asset management industry, we are equipped for the 21st century. And by doing so, in an era where the returns on government bonds are probably 1 to 1.5%, 20 years ago those returns were 5 to 5.5%. These days, your return on equity portfolios is going to be more like 6 to 6.5%. And again, 20 years ago, they're the returns that you could have seen on a risk-free investment. The world has changed, and as a consequence, we believe the asset management industry needs to change. Hopefully that's a useful summary for you guys of what we're up to, and some insights into how we can apply data and human behavior to asset management. I'm going to open the floor up for any questions. I have a question here on, did USA win again into the former bobsleigh in 2014? I'm pretty sure they didn't. I think it went back to Germany in 2014, but I don't have the list in front of me. We've got a question on non-correlation. So I said non-correlation within portfolios. These days, there's no asset class which you'll find correlation on. You just end up with lower correlation. So you won't find anything with negative correlation. But the three sectors that we found where you end up with statistically significant low correlations is the small cap, the UK small cap versus UK large cap. It's global technology against equities in general, and also emerging market debt against just about any asset class you can think of. So we brought those three areas into our portfolios as sectoral calls within the portfolio, and what we're finding to date is that they are definitely having a positive impact on portfolios. We have a question here on, will the MPS portfolios be available on other platforms? At the moment, these portfolios are just available on the HFO platform, but we are in the process of opening up discussions with other platforms to see if there's any appetite to have us on any. And I guess what I'd say to the question there, Jane, is if there are any particular platforms that you'd like to see us on, please drop us a line or feed that back via the feedback form. And obviously, there's lots of platforms out there in the marketplace. I think the market leader is on 11 platforms, so there's a process to go through. But if you can help us prioritize which platforms you'd like to see us on, that would certainly help us. There's a great question here on, are the active and passive portfolios unfettered? That's actually a really good question there. Yeah, so both the active and the passive portfolios are completely unfettered. So in the passive portfolios, you'd see the names that you would expect to see there, the Vanguards, the Lexors, the iShares of this world, but we are completely unfettered. And our selection process on passive portfolios isn't just about choosing the cheapest option out there, which we see a lot of our competitors doing. What we look for is efficient portfolios. So it's not just about having the cheapest. We always go for physical replication as an example. And what we're looking to do there is deliver the most efficient return rather than just the cheapest return. Saving 1 or 2 basis points on the product is of little use to us if you give that all away through a unfeasible tracking error. And again, similarly on the active portfolios, we are completely unfettered there. There's a team in our London office who spend all of their time researching hundreds of managers on a day-to-day basis. We have no bias, nor do we use any of our own portfolio, our own products within our portfolios. Okay, so a question here from Dennis asks, do we have the three sectors that I referred to earlier, do we have them in every model portfolio? Now, towards the more cautious and conservative end of the spectrum, where there's less equity exposure, we wouldn't have allocation to technology as an example. That said, towards the end of the spectrum, one thing that is worth noting is in the cautious and moderately cautious portfolios that I referred to earlier, one of the concerns we have as an industry, as a asset manager regarding the entire industry, is at that end of the spectrum, we believe that cautious and conservative investors have been funneled into what we consider to be high-risk products. And what I mean by that is government bonds. The government bonds, again, look at how that sector's evolved over the past 20 years or so. And I think back to 1999 when I started managing fixed income portfolios, the yield on a portfolio of government bonds was 6%, and the duration on a portfolio of government bonds was also 6%. Fast forward to the present day, and the yield on that same portfolio of government bonds is now 1.5%, and the duration is 12. So the amount of risk in a portfolio of government bonds has doubled, and the returns available have dropped by over 2/3. And we just don't think that's a sensible way to allocate funds. So because we are intelligent investors, I would say, what we've done for cautious and moderately cautious investors is we've in fact, across the entire range, for our government bond allocation, we've significantly reduced the interest rate exposure within our portfolios. And instead of holding products where you end up with a duration of 12 in your government bond exposure, we've taken our duration down to just 2 years, and we think that's the sensible, intelligent thing to do. A question here from Xander asks whether we think that property correlates with equities. Yes, absolutely, property does correlate with equities. The nice thing is it's not as highly correlated as, say, US equities and UK equities. And so it does have a allocation within all of our portfolios. The correlation tends to hover around the 60% mark. Obviously, there's two ways to measure correlation here. Within our portfolios, we use real estate investment trusts, which will show, simply because they are listed instruments, they will show higher correlation in the short term with equities, but longer term studies show us that property correlations with equities tend to average out around the 60 to 65% mark. So property definitely does have a place within our portfolios and is within all of our allocation. And I think that's an important point, particularly when you consider that some of the other so-called multi-asset portfolios out there tend to just be a mixture of just bonds and just equities. A question here on, will we be on FE analytics? I think this is in reference to will our performance data be on FE analytics? And if that is the question, that's actually a really top question, because we're discussing with FE at the moment about their FE transmission service. That said, there's an article going on the site in the next couple of days, and it's actually a real hobby horse of mine. This is, whether, particularly in the MPS world, as advisors, you're not faced with the same level of transparency that I believe you ought to have when you're dealing with funds. You're in the fund management industry. Funds are being well organized into sectors for a long period of time now, and you have access to performance figures and performance analytics free of charge, readily accessible, and you don't have that same level of transparency in the MPS world. So we're real campaigners for lifting this veil of opacity that we see in the MPS world at the moment. You can get around this to a certain extent using software such as FE Analytics and using things like the asset risk consultants. And whilst that's available to subscribers to the service, actually on the other side of the fence there, as asset managers, that's an additional cost for us as an asset manager. Figures range between £10,000 and £20,000 a year in order just to provide the likes of FE Analytics and ARC with our own data, which to me just doesn't seem sensible. So what we're calling on the entire asset management industry, particularly the managers within the MPS space, is we're calling on them to form a collective body where I would like to make all of our performance data publicly available free of charge and available to advisors such as yourselves without the need to have a middleman in place, basically just making all of our products more expensive to customers. So that's something you'll expect to see more of us talking about going forward. A question here, would you still use real estate in physical, not just shares of property companies? We would, but we don't at the moment. So it's actually a good distinction between understanding some of the differences between our active and our passive range. At this moment in time, through our tactical asset allocation decisions, we do not think that physical property investment is a sound place to be. That's primarily based on a couple of things. The first one of which is the low yields you see on bonds at the moment. Properties, whether we like it or not, are closely related to bonds. So given our views on what we expect to see in bond markets through a yield correction going forward, that gives us some concerns about property returns in general going forward. And if you consider that actually getting into physical property portfolios at this moment in time, there's an upfront charge of 5 to 7% there. Given we think annualized returns on property will be more like 5%, we're just uncomfortable giving up 18 months worth of return just as an entry charge to get into physical property at the moment. So whilst we can invest in physical property in portfolios, we've decided to gain allocation through real estate investment trusts where there's no upfront costs at this moment in time in our passive portfolios, whereas within our active portfolios, what we've done is we've replicated the return profile of property using absolute return equity and absolute return bond funds. Another question here from Dennis. Are you concerned about liquidity? That's quite an open-ended question. Liquidity in general, there's plenty of transactions taking place in the market, and of course, liquidity tends to be quite episodic. You don't suddenly see liquidity, there's no trend towards lower liquidity. What you tend to see when it comes to liquidity is it dries up and it dries up quite rapidly. So there's no immediate concerns on liquidity, primarily because of two things. Obviously, since March 2009, in the UK and around the world, we've had a consistent program of quantitative easing. So let's take the UK banking system as a good example. There is currently £2.1 trillion worth of cash in the UK banking system. And a lot of that is actually trapped within what's called the OCF, the financial companies market. That's us, that's asset managers, it's insurance companies, it's pension funds, etc. So there's actually a lot of liquidity within the asset management industry at this moment in time. So there's no current concerns around liquidity, but it's something we do keep an eye on using measures such as what's happening in the interbank market, where there have been signs of some strain at this moment in time. And obviously we'll be watching that even more closely as we go through the periods, particularly in the US, as they start to reverse some of the QE programs. Okay, I think we're done on questions there. I hope that was really useful. We love your feedback, good, bad, or indifferent. Please give us your feedback, and the CPD forms will be out, and hopefully we'll speak to you all soon. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.